Welcome to the Steve and Cimino Says Boom Show, issue number 69.
Boom.
Hey everyone, welcome to Pop XP. And before the show starts, make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload awesome new content. And don't forget, if you can, make sure to share our stream on all your social media outlets. We appreciate it, and thanks for helping us grow the Pop XP channel.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Steve and Cimino Show, issue number 69. And now, before we get into today's episode, tell us what we got to do.
Everyone knows what we got to do. Everyone, please look below, click that subscribe button, and smash that bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload awesome new episodes. And just so everyone knows, for tonight's guest, if you want to check out his book and grab yourself a copy, the link is in the live chat pinned at the top, and also the link is in the description below. And gentlemen, I'm always in the mood for a good history lesson and talking with the professionals who put the history together for us. So without further ado, what do we have going on, gents?
Okay, first off, we love history. That's what this is all about. But before we get into it, Steve, why don't you tell us about your doing a little recording with a couple episodes of Pawn Stars. Tell us how'd that all go. Why don't you tell all your fans out there how that went? We saw all those pictures.
Well, they had been on a road show for quite a long time, and the producer asked me to come out to Arizona because they were having they had 3 items that were being brought in. I can't talk about those items, but one of the items was absolutely spectacular. I've never seen anything like it before, and I got to spend a lot of time with Rick and have a really good time. I filmed with Rick, I filmed with Chumley, and I also hung out with Corey a little bit. So yeah, it was a great show, and those episodes will be on this season, not next season, this season.
Good. I love seeing you, Steve. It makes me laugh. It's like when I see Sam Rosen in the crowd there at the White House, and when I see you, Pierre, I just saw those are all like Pop XP family right there. When you see when you see all that, but the reason why I brought that up is because obviously you talk about the history of those items that come in there, and you are an expert and Steve, a connoisseur too. Well, why don't you tell us about today's guest, because he's also a connoisseur and a great guy that really loves the industry and goes out there and tries to get the facts, and he has fun with it. What can you tell us about today's guest?
Well, I always love speaking to people who have gone to the next level. As I do have a fair amount of knowledge. Yeah, I would say on the ladder of knowledge when it comes to comics, I'm probably at a 7. I love speaking to people who are in 8s, 9s, and 10s because I still love to learn something. I find it very rewarding. And today's guest has been really digging into the weeds up to his armpits, right? Getting in there. And so I'm looking forward to getting some nice little nuggets of information out there from our historian, excellence, Mr. Alex Ground.
Yeah, and he loves to travel, and what I love about Alex is he loves to just talk about this stuff, and he has a love of the comics, and you can tell he's passionate, and he likes to get the answers, and he's very unbiased. He just loves the history of it. And obviously he has a great book coming. We're going to be showing that. Now, I just said it's down below. I also have read that. Very well done. And I have to say this, I love the man very much because he's also a great father. I love a guy that always posts up his kids and their well-being, like Niall. and stuff. And like I seriously, I mean that shows you character to me. And we did a lot of interviews with Roy, me, and stuff. And I love that he just has passion with it, and his podcast does very well too. So without further ado, let's bring out one of the new age historians and a great eye doctor at that, Mr. Alex Grant.
Woo! Hey, thanks for having me on, you guys. Yeah, woo! Yeah. Well, that was really nice. That was a beautiful introduction. I have to thank you all for that. That was thanks for making me feel so welcome.
Oh, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Alex. Like I said, you have a great podcast too. I remember the first time I got you, Roy. It was a few years ago, but I remember we could only do it on the phone, and we were so pressured for time because we were taking care of all his media. But we made amends for that just a few months ago, and you had a great episode with Roy. Yeah. And once again, Alex, I love you.
That was so much fun, and thank you for making that possible, John. You're so great with that, and you could tell Roy and you have this really special connection, and you really look out for him. So I have to thank you for doing that as well. I think we all should. But yeah, thanks for having me on and being so supportive. And it's been a pleasure. Our relationship's been a real pleasure.
Right, and just like you, I'm a fan. I just happen to be caught in this whirlwind with these guys over here, Stephen, Niall, and Roy. That it's just my life has been fantastic. I mean, we love the comics, we love the history and all that stuff. So without further ado, Alex, let's talk about your origins in the comic books. Like how did little Alex Grant get into this?
Well, when we were kind of an immigrant family, right, from the Middle East back in the day. So, my first initiation as a 1-year-old, that was 1979, was the Christopher Reeve Superman movie, and I went with my parents, and I don't remember that, but it's like there's such a strong emotional connection. It was like part of my formative years. And then those 70s Spider-Man TV show reruns were on TV, and Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. And then I'm watching Superman again as a 4-year-old, and just really just kind of soaked in. And it was essentially comic books became like maybe a third parent to me in a sense. Mm-hmm. And a lot of my value system stemmed from reading a lot of that, especially Spider-Man and Superman, and those are the corporate mascots of those two companies, but those were the ones that really spoke to me in different ways. And then He-Man and Masters of the Universe and whatnot, mini comics. And then, I became a big, Marvel kid, just catching up on and reading Marvel Masterworks, classic X-Men, a lot of reprints, and just getting sucked into the soap opera that is, the Marvel Universe, right? That Roy Thomas, helped build. And of course, the Silver Age, the other Silver Age guys, especially, Stan, Jack, Steve, and the rest, Gene Colan, whatever. And so that just became, big deal for me. And then reading a lot of stuff in the 80s in real time while catching up on the old stuff. And then I think after, after school and after I started working, I wasn't studying anymore. And I was like, what do I study now? I almost had this weird void. And that oddly became another of my own self-inflicted, like a monk, whipping myself, but reading and catching up on just comic history. Like, where did it all come from? That was the main thing. And I think what really opened my mind up to that question was reading Steve Ditko's Doctor Strange and those panels. And it was just crazy that they did that at that time. That level of astral projection and metaphysical comics just wasn't done before that. And when everyone deviates from that formula, it does tend not to do as well. Doctor Strange does well in that formula. And it's like, who's Steve Ditko? Who's Stan Lee? Who's, Jack Kirby? And so it was just a huge thing. And then expanding that to DC, who's Mort Weisinger? Who's Mort Weisinger? Who's, Julius Schwartz? Who's Jerry Siegel, Joe Shuster? And it just became this never ending, answer. Like, it just never stopped. And then, the Batman villains and Dick Tracy villains kind of come from that, or rather vice versa, comes from Dick Tracy. What's Chester Gould's writing? Okay, now Little Orphan Annie, and why are Billy Batson's eyes like that? And why is Little Orphan Annie?
I love that.
And it's like, it turned into this never-ending thing that, it's like a 7-year project and putting all my notes together. And I'd make occasional videos on different things, but putting it into a whole narrative picture is what I was trying to do with this book, and make it make sense. And the origins of the superhero comic book, especially the comic strip origins, but the various origins, golden age of illustration, whatever. And then how does that superhero comic book, that formula, progress over time? What are external historical factors that pushed it in that direction? And why is the struggle for superhero realism, why is that secret formula that just keeps that whole industry alive? And the different key figures who did that and who figured out the next step in that. And it just became an obsessive quest to put it together. And I have to thank McFarlane, my publisher, for giving me that outlet to do it that way, and having them kind of review it after. And also my editor, Scott Robinson, a PhD, who, he helped me formulate my ideas. He would he gave me like a 2-day, oral seminar of like, here's how you formulate, think about it like this, and facts and backup citations, whatever. And that just became this book. And I'm excited it's finally out, because it was like this the 7-year, craziness of
it's funny how you say that, Alex, about I had immigrant parents too, and at the time comics weren't kosher, but they wanted me to be American, and they wanted me to so they didn't have any stigma with comics or anything. So buying comic books and reading that stuff and absorbing all that at that time, and then getting into the Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, Electric Company, and all that stuff. I mean, we kind of have the same way of going into the world. Like my parents were very pro-American, so they wanted us to read all that stuff and watch all that stuff. And so there was no hiding comics under the under the covers and all that you hear, like those stories. But I what I like about what you do also, Alex, just to say that I know how you get into the history of it, but the difference between your podcast and ours, we like to celebrate, maybe get naked and have a good time with all the creators and all that stuff.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
No, but you have a very professional way of like conducting your podcast. So like you get a very informative, almost teacher-esque. It reminds me of like being a professor. So you can sit down and actually have a serious discussion, 2-hour discussion with these creators, and it's very concise and very it's very informative.
Oh,
like
good.
I said,
well, I'm glad you like it. I'm glad you like it.
No, yeah, and so we try to get to the more, though we love the history and all that stuff, we still like to have fun with all this stuff.
Yeah,
so
and I just want to, and that's great, and honestly, fun is what it's about. And every now and then I do let go of a weird off-color joke, and then I'm like, all right, well, I don't want to alienate, I don't want to, weird anyone out, but I totally love, the fun format, and I love the colorfulness of your guys's layout on your podcast. Like, it's a lot of fun, and no, it's great. It's great.
With this madcap crew, how can it not be? Go ahead, Steve.
So, Alex, I'm a fellow researcher for many years.
Yeah.
I thought of myself as I was going to be the person who took over from a guy called George Olszewski, who was doing the Marvel indexes starting in the 70s and 80s. So I was focused. Of course, on all the characters and the continuity and the storylines. And I was also, up to my neck in that. I also did my fair share of research into the real people, who, what, why, when. The bricks and mortar, the things that were going on. But in my most grandiose days, I would have never have thought to try to encompass everything in one single book. I mean, just the thought of that alone would have dropped me to my knees.
Yeah.
Because, I had enough to do with Marvel. So how did you go about, without your mind exploding, how did you go about piecing this together and putting all these pieces together? Because it just goes on and on and on. It's a massive amount of material.
Hey, thank you for that. Yeah. Well, that's it's funny. Danny Fingeroth, he did a blurb for this, and he said you managed to put even competing theories about superhero comic books together into one overarching narrative. And he's like, you actually managed to do it. And that was a huge compliment, because how do you make a story out of these things? Are they related? Well, they are related. And the main thing is what makes, it was basically answering two questions. Where do superhero comic books come from? So that's everything before it converging into that first Superman, and then the effects of that. And then what keeps superhero comic books viable as an industry, right? And when you just answer that one question, then you realize that it starts to rotate around the same answer over the decades. And that is to make it as applicable to the readers and their everyday experience as you possibly can, even though it's a fantasy product. The basic superhero, my friend Pete Coogan says, superpowers, mission of justice, costume, codename. Fine. Those are the three things. But who were the people that kept it viable by adding more and more narrative devices from other genres? And who were they, and why were they important? Why does that matter? Right. And why did that basic superhero just go out of business by like 1948? Nobody really cared about him, and they wanted crime, and they wanted other stuff. Well, it's because you have to add more stuff to it to keep it more relevant, to the readers. And it comes down to realism. And who were the key people that unlocked that realism, right? Julius Schwartz added a more realistic science fiction. He added a more of a human approach. Like, those people were impressed by their own powers. They were discovering their powers with the reader. They weren't arrogant. They were insecure. They had some insecurity. They had some. They were Eisenhower era insecure people. That's a little bit more conformist, but. And then who took it to the next level in the 60s in the JFK era? And that was, the Marvel bullpen. And, of course, Stan, Jack, and Steve, for that short few years that all three were there was a shared vision. You can get Kirby's haggard, monstrous faces. You can get Ditko's, weird, gnarled hands, faces, the anxiety. And with Stan wanting that realistic superhero, that world outside your window, of course, they split. But that formula stayed. Roy Thomas takes that to the next level by incorporating outside literature and expanding, with his college know-how and looking at things in a wider, almost more educated way. But he keeps it more realistic and expands on that, And then Jim Starlin, so from the idealism of the superhero, a little more humanism, relatability, but then you have the realism, the flaws of the Marvel. Then you have the fear of death. That's Jim Starlin, adding that in the 70s. Thanos, major figure, revolutionary stuff from Jim Starlin. Then you have after the fear of death, and what happens when people start to fear death? They get selfish, and Alan Moore brings that to the superheroes. And what Alan Moore did was he says, well, there's no mission for justice because superheroes just create selfish creeps. And that actually kind of, it stayed that way. And then we kind of backtracked, and now we pick and choose from all that stuff to keep it relevant to today's society. So that's how I went about it, is I tried to kind of just keep it focused on that one mission. How did superheroes, why did they evolve to stay viable in a marketplace? What kept them relevant? It was the realism to the everyday reader.
Wow. Go ahead now.
Now, first off, I love the cover of this book.
Oh, thank you.
This cover is magnificent. This is eye-catching. If I saw that on the shelf, I mean, I would just, beeline right to it. Great cover. I love what you did there. Now, what I'm curious about is, this is understanding superhero comic books.
Yeah.
And I purchased it. I don't have it. I went on Amazon. I purchased a copy.
Oh, cool.
So
Thank
I'll have
you.
it Friday. And I'll read it. But what I'd like to know is, it's two questions.
Yeah.
First, where do you bring us in the beginning of the book? And then secondly, in today's day and age, I personally think the understanding of superheroes and what they are is lost again. Does your book touch on that?
Yeah, well, it does. So first, where does it start? Well, it starts in the pre-superhero era, right? And it just goes to the history of the medium. So what happened is there's comic books. Then there's these kind of mythical, powerful figures, and they don't really come together. then when they finally do converge into so there's proto superheroes, or there's Doc Savage, there's the Shadow, right? There's Spring Heel Jack. Then you have the comic strips, which is how to draw sequential stories, which is what a lot of those people like Dick Tracy, Little Orphan Annie, all that stuff, even to the very first dialogue balloons, that are shown in the 1600s. There's actually dialogue balloon comics going that far back. So I kind of start there, but I don't spend too much time on that really old stuff. But then I bring together how the medium and different elements, the golden age of illustration. Why does one poster that has to have everything composed just right, why does that matter? Well, that matters to comic book covers. Like, you got to grab a reader and get different elements of the story into one image. So it goes to these different things. The golden age of cinema. When I interviewed with the Ditko family recently, Steve Ditko's brother, he confirmed that, they were all like Johnny Weissmuller, Tarzan, nuts. They were watching that stuff. And, why does the golden age of cinema matter? Why does Douglas Fairbanks matter? Who are these people? The first Zorro movie, all that stuff is really important. So putting all those different things together, and then how all those elements are brought together into those initial comic books, which didn't really sell very well. It was superhero comic books that sold well. It was once that genre and then that medium, right when they hit, now they're both doing really well. Now there's an outlet for that kind of escapism, that kind of visual storytelling. So there's a bit of that proto stuff leading up to that. And that's kind of the part one building blocks. There's like 5 parts, in this thing. And, then there's part 2, the rise and fall of superheroes, which is the golden age and why they fall apart. EC Comics, Frederick Wertham, all that stuff. And where do all those golden age people go? They go to advertising other places. They got better stuff to do. Fly to the Superheroes, that's the 3rd part. And now you have, Julia Schwartz, essentially pretty much, I think, saving the superhero comic book with that DC stuff he was doing. Flash, Green Lantern, Justice League of America. I mean, that's big deal. And then, of course, the Marvel era, and really kind of breaking apart in as much of as objective manner as possible as what did, Stan, Jack, and Steve bring to it. And what happens when, a team creates a huge success like the Marvel era, you'll have discrepancies in how each one describes what they did, and breaking that down. And why does fame create these kind of messes in the conversation? And then, where they all went. And that's part 3. That's the flight of the superheroes. That's kind of I love that part. I love it all, and then the modern superheroes, and the Starlin, the Alan Moore, John Byrne gets he gets major kudos. He brought that old stuff from the 60s into the 80s with a whole new. He revitalized it. I mean, he
modernized it. Yeah,
he completely revitalized that old stuff. He didn't need to, he brought what was magical and made it apply to the new audience, and that's actually what they're all trying to do now. Is they're all trying to do what John Byrne basically did, and John Byrne should get credit for that. And then of course the final part, which is I didn't want to kind of neglect I wanted to make sure to acknowledge African Americans in comic books, women in comics, get that. So I have Trina Robbins. There's a Trina Robbins section in it. There's Professor Lauren Foster section in it. And then the death of the 20th century comic book greats. It's like going over like what happened to all these people. What happened to them? I also kind of put their medical causes of death. It was, for some reason, I just needed to have an ending, and I think that was a good. But the epilogue really goes over, what do superhero comic books do now to try to capture that modern audience? Do they, what part of those elements that were pioneered before? How do you keep readers relevant? And the population is getting a lot more mixed. How do you apply to everybody? Is diversity part of that answer or not? The future will tell that, but those kind of elements are brought up. Is realism, bringing it down to what everyone is facing. How do you appeal to a divided audience, a politically divided audience? It's not like everyone's united by patriotism like they used to be. So those challenges and those kind of and those challenges and those discussions are had in the epilogue of where do we go from here. How do you if the key has been maintaining realism, then make it real. Don't sugarcoat it. But we'll see where the industry goes. But that's kind of how that part is addressed.
Yeah. Now, do you stay current with books today, or are you finding them harder to read? I'm getting a lot from a lot of pros, and even them. So, they're just not too into the new stuff that's coming out.
Well, I mean, I find old stuff more interesting anyway. I grew up, when my parents were working a lot, my grandparents, kind of like Aunt May and Uncle Ben, but it was my grandparents. They raised me a lot in my childhood. So I have an affinity for older people, older stuff. I have a patient the other day who's like 95, and he was telling me, oh yeah, I remember when Famous Funnies first came out. And I'm like, okay, tell me about that. I mean, where were you when that happened?
Yeah.
But that being said, I do every now and then, I will go and just binge a bunch of new stuff. Like if I say, okay, I'm going to try to catch up on Spider-Man. So then I'll just read like a whole bunch of Amazing Spider-Man. And, I like it. There's some, it's fine. It's not the golden age, my golden age, which is when I was a teenager, my younger teens. Right. And so for me, that era is like 85 to like 92. But that being said, yeah, I like it. Okay. I did catch up on Guardians of the Galaxy. I like those characters. Mighty Thor. I love Mighty Thor. So I always enjoyed catching up with that. So I've definitely I'm up to date on Mighty Thor. And let's see. Have you guys tried to keep up on X-Men? Have you guys tried to do that?
No.
Okay. So there's some decent stuff still, but there are so many X-Men books at every given time. You can't just read one and then read it sequentially. There's so many crossovers with like the 8 other ones that it's like spaghetti. And I spent this 3-day period like trying to just read it all. And I'm like, even doing that all at the same time, I was still kind of confused about, how they all fit together. But so it's not as cohesive as the 80s or before.
Yeah.
Where they were like, well, you can't use Wolverine here because he's in that comic this month. That doesn't happen anymore. Now he's, in 9 comics, and you're like, how does he find the time to do all this stuff in January? But,
I always find, I always watch Steve's little soliloquy videos and stuff. And I love, Steve, how you said that you were trying the new Captain America. And I laugh because, see, it was just too slow. And I get it. They're trying to, and they always try to write for the paperback or whatever have you. Right, I don't know. Right. But yeah, my thing is when you read the stuff today, and then I have given it an occasional try, it all is trying to be with a spin on it of what originally. I rather go back to the old stuff, the older stuff, because it just was more real. I don't know. There was just more energy. It was more feeling. It seemed like new. It's not like a rehashed thing. Yeah. But my question to you is, Alex, is you said something interesting about, when Edgar Rice Burroughs came and then all of a sudden the superhero comes and then, and we all love it. Today, as we know, even back then in the 40s and the 30s, all through history, but today, especially because of social media, there's so much polarization. And even with the mass media and stuff, we see even now the heroes in the movies, they're all being politicized and things are falling apart. But there's still a universal love for the hero. And for some reason, despite what rhyme, religion, you could go to Russia, you can even go to China, all these places. Yeah. There's always a love for Spider-Man. There's always a love for Batman. You even got painted on these soldiers. I saw these murals in Russia. Captain America, the Avengers, it was all painted. And it's so weird. God, they would say like, oh, F America, but yet they love Captain America. Yes. I want to ask you, what is it about the superhero that it's just, even though I think they're being destroyed now by the media, they're still strong enough to come back. One good movie with did in the right way, it can shoot right back up to being $1 billion seller. But what is it about when all your studies being a historian? Yeah. What do you think it is about the superhero that why everyone loves them? And like there's something about that, and it doesn't matter what nationality, it crosses all borders. Superheroes are like the piece that everybody can agree on. I don't know, what do you think about that? What is it about that?
Well, the movies have done a good job of making the heroes defend more than just America, right? That although they're facing global threats, they're facing threats to the whole world, or to all of space-time, or to this whole dimension, right? So they have a good way of making it, where everyone can kind of root for that story. So that's kind of important as far as the movies and the penetration into the mass audience is to make it a global threat. But as far as the superhero, there's something about a strong character that is beyond our strength, that still cares about us, and has some sort of visual pure form that captures some sort of archetype that can go back, thousands of years, whether it's the Greek gods or the Norse gods or something. There's proto superheroes where you don't need, a costume, but you have some sort of alias and you're defending the weak. And I think we all want that level of being seen or valued by someone better than us. I mean, and that we can all agree is better than us in some way. Well, you can actually find that answer in Christopher Reeve's Superman. Why did Christopher Reeve's Superman is universally loved and the other Supermen are not universally loved? Like, some people like that one a little more than other, but Christopher Reeve's Superman, why did that register with everyone? And what was he able to do? And if you study him, that's why. It's because the facial expressions, he cared, he had hope for us as really lesser beings, and he never thought of himself as superior, and he cared for us like we were his friends. He valued us. He valued what we had to say. There's something about Christopher Reeve's Superman that answers that real primal question that goes back, a long time. And no one has. There's no, Robert Downey Jr. was a great Tony Stark and whatnot. Hugh Jackman's a great Wolverine. It's basically like a Western character, and but there's something about Christopher Reeve's Superman that everyone universally loves, and that's in his performance. You'll find the answer to that question.
I think that's a very good answer. I'll also throw in Bill Bixby in there too, because everybody loved him, and then you knew he was trying to control that inner thing, because he had something so pure about that.
Trauma himself. I mean, his child died, in like 1980, so he was carrying pain, inside of him. He was a very compassionate human being, and that shows in his Bruce Banner, even before his kids death. But after, it's that compassion plus his own inner pain, and that really registered well. It's horrible, but it did. His performance as Bruce Banner and the pain he carried around as the Hulk, really, he was channeling some real stuff there. That's a genuine aspect of Bill Bixby.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of parallels between Bill Bixby and Christopher Reeves, because there was you universally loved. That's why it did. Right. So, and arguably in the late 70s, early 80s, the Hulk was the most popular superhero in the world, because everybody was watching those Lou Ferrigno, those live action Hulks, which were groundbreaking. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah. We've been speaking about these wide arching stories and concepts, but I want to dig into a little bit more of the personal with you, Alex, here. Now, over all these years, all the genres, all the books, all the comics, all the characters that you've read, I'm curious, out of all of them, which storyline or character has grabbed you the most, that you're thinking, hey, after reading everything that there is, I can't live without this character or this story? I do know that you did mention that you started off with the big two, Superman and Spider-Man. But as the years have passed and you've been exposed to thousands of characters and stories, what do you, Alex, really like go, you know what? I'm going to have a day off research. I'm going to go and read this for fun. I had to read this.
Yeah, that's going to be it's two characters, but Spider-Man, by that first 10 years, and then it's just magic even now. And I can actually I read it to my son. Me and him actually read these Spider-Man comics together. We read all the, we're now finishing the Ramita Lee newspaper strip volumes,
Good
and
stuff.
then we've done the the Spidey super stories. So we've read all of those together, and we did all the Ditko stuff. So I love those. Rereading them with him has been probably the most fun I've been having reading comics in a really long time, because he's experiencing it for the first time, and I'm remembering how it was for me. So that's probably the number one. The number two is Chester Gould's Dick Tracy. I know it sounds esoteric and weird, but there's something about that cartoon style and the horrible violence and the vengefulness of it that is just, I just get a kick out of that stuff. I mean, it is gruesome stuff, and it's drawn in such a cute way. I just can't get out of my mind. I love that with a passion.
That's interesting. I love those. For me too, the Spider-Man #1 all the way to 202, and with those annuals, I think is the greatest run of comics of all time.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Now there's some good stuff after, but those are my favorite. Yes,
right. And also the Fantastic Four. I think the 1 to 102 and all those annuals.
Yeah.
There's so many, but those are my creme de la creme. But it's interesting. We got a lot in common there too. But and just so you know, I read a lot of those too to my my daughter too, and I put the propaganda in her. But I didn't read the comic. I didn't read the newspaper strips to her, which I didn't.
Right. Well, because they weren't really reprinted probably at that point, right?
No, they weren't.
Yeah. Right. And so for me, it's been great. I did get some Super Friends, so we're going to do that after this. But yeah, my favorite is Spider-Man. And then, of course, I love the Ramita, Lee, Spider-Man. That whole Kingpin adventure is just amazing. And so, yeah, I mean, it's so hard to choose, right? But yeah, Spider-Man, first 10 years. Fantastic Four, first 10 years. I love that stuff. But, again, I like some of the stuff after. I mean, John Byrne's X-Men with Chris Claremont, of course. Actually, I love the whole Claremont X-Men era is just incredible. And then the John Byrne Fantastic Four, I think is just, that speaks to me. Eric Larson's Spider-Man, I love that stuff. So, again, I mean, I still love some stuff after, especially that I was reading when I was receptive. But, yeah, those Spider-Man is kind of the number one totem. It's my totem animal if I were to pick one.
Good. Go ahead now.
So in the book, you have a foreword by Jim Steranko. Yeah. Was that always planned, or is that something that just happened to come up during the production of your book?
Well, Jim's a good friend. I did an interview with him for the podcast, and we email quite a bit, and then we've hung out at about 3 shows where after the show's over, me and him will just hang out till like 3 or 4 a.m. and just shoot the shit and have fun talking. And I love the guy. He's really, I have a whole chapter. One chapter I do have in my book that's, I think, also different from other history books that try to do it, is there's a whole chapter on the magicians and the old magicians and the different ones and them being influential on the superhero genre. And, that Steranko is a magician too, but he also wrote the Steranko History of Comics, which was a mind blast for me when I read those 2 volumes, because that's actually, after reading that, I started my YouTube channel and wanted to make informational videos. I'm like, whoa, everyone should know this stuff, and so he was really influential. And then I told him, my book was inspired from his. And he was so generous. It's funny. I joke about this, and it sounds weird, but we're both Scorpios. And when I met him, it was around our birthdays in November, and at Dallas Fantasy Fair, J. David Spurlock, who's a mutual friend, through that. And I was exactly 40, and he was exactly 80, and something lined up, but we just became friends. And so I told him about the book, and I said, I'd love if you're willing, I'd love a forward. So I sent him the manuscript, and he really liked it. He was impressed, and because he just, I think he was, just kind of proud of the whole thing. And so he was kind enough to write it forward. And one thing I really loved, it's his final line, which just I love, because I was hoping that this would be kind of like a, seen as a continuation of the Steranko history of comics in a way. And he wrote his final line, which he said, author, okay, he talks about interviewing people for his book. And he said, author Alex Grand interviewed me in much the same way in his quest to continue exploring the magic of the narrative arts and the generations of superheroes that emerged in its wake. We mutually confirmed that the past is as important as the future, and that the story of the American superhero deserves to be remembered, insightfully analyzed, and preserved. And this volume continues in that tradition. And it just blew me away that he would write it in those terms. And it just felt like, it was like the quest. You go on that quest, and there are these people in there, like these elders that have already done their quest, and they've already done a bigger quest. Steranko, Roy Thomas, these people who have already done their huge quest. And I'm not, but I had my own little one, a little miniature one, and just meeting guys like them and being the influences on me that they were. Roy, John knows, but Roy and I will email and it really enjoy our back and forth. And it's been a beautiful journey that's, I think, culminated in this.
I have a question though, Alex. How do you manage? Because I know this is who you truly are. This is like you. No, I mean you remind me a lot of myself. Just an albeit a little bit calmer and more professional. but you really have a passion for this, and just like you said, like about the journey. I'm curious, because obviously you're an educated man. You became a doctor and stuff. Like, I'm just saying, going through school, none of this ever applied. And then, because I mean, like, when did this all kind of fester? I mean, obviously, I'm just saying, like, you had to put a lot of effort in getting to your educational background, being an eye doctor and all that stuff. I mean, that's a lot of work. But then what you're doing now is also a lot of work. Are you neglecting patients now, or what? What's going on?
Not at all. So basically what happens is, I work right from 8 to 5. And then after that, then I hang out with my family. I come home, I hang out with my family till about 9. Now they all go to bed at like 9:15. And I got a lot of energy. So I'm up till like 11:30. So, that's like 3-4 hours of just kind of, doing stuff. And there's only so many episodes of Jersey Shore I can actually watch. Right. So what I do is, so I'll be like, all right. And because I'm used to reading, a lot from my school. So I just read a lot. I must have, if you look at the citations on the back of the book, I read all of those. There's like 1,200 citations. Now there's different ones quoting from the same book, but if you look at the bibliography, I went through all that stuff. So, so, I just got used to reading in high volumes, and I used my time that I had, and that was it,
Yeah, just so you guys know, me and Alex were talking on the phone, and remember me and him talked for like 2 hours, and I think you had to see a patient, and then you saw the patient, and then he calls me back, and we go right back into what we were talking about, and I just found that fascinating, that like you can see your passion for that, and I love it, and I appreciate it, and I see it in you, and that's why I love you, Alex.
I appreciate it, and I love my day job too. It's the science of vision, right? And honestly, comics are a visual art form. Everything's visual with me, so it's just another aspect, that I also love. It's just, but when it comes to a study and a pursuit, in my free time, when I'm not doing those things, it'd be comics, because I love that stuff. I mean, even when I was studying back in school, I was drawing little panels with action, and that was my way of memorizing stuff.
Oh yeah.
And by imagining it, in a sequence, I was able to remember chemical conversions and organic chemistry that way. Like, it became its own. So that was how I learned. And so people would be like, what the hell are you drawing over there? And even in the library, like, I'd be doing these weird things and doing weird stuff and drawing. they're like, what is this guy, like Rain Man? Like, what is that? And but no, it was really just the way I studied. It's just the way my mind works, you know.
Was
It's
this
all
easier than
it's
writing your
all one. It's all
dissertation?
one thing. It's all one thing.
Yeah.
What
Was this easier to write than your dissertation?
This was arguably. This was about the same.
Yeah.
This was about the same as all the studying and tests. This felt as painful as that. That's what
But it was a labor of love, though. Such a labor.
yeah, labor of love. Yeah,
Yeah.
right, exactly.
Go ahead, Steve.
You know, not long ago we were talking about you know, various people and their libraries and what they what they get left behind. So I'm curious. You obviously had to go and purchase and find a tremendous amount of research material, books about comics, biographies, autobiographies, everything.
Yeah.
What if there is one or a few? What books completely like blew you away and made you like sit down there for a second and go, "Oh my word, I'm going to have to rethink things here. I had no idea about this." Because obviously.
Yeah.
Books that have been written, especially that were written in the 70s, that have first-hand accounts from people who they're no longer here.
They're all dead
we
now,
have is those quotes or interviews, whatever it is. I'm just curious because obviously you have a very research brain, and you're digging in, and each one of these things, like when I was younger, was like a little nugget, like a little Easter egg. You're like, oh my word!
Yeah.
What had an impact on you when you read it?
Well, as mentioned, the Strango History of Comics was a mind explosion because there are quotes from like Bill Finger and stuff in there. Like that's wild. There's a lot of biographies that Tomorrow's did and they're like almost like biographical / interview books. I've read all of those, and I think those were really effective for me in realizing how human these creators are. And that they're people. And I think Tomorrow's really helped me, really drove that point home for me. And then, Fantagraphics, they have, this sounds weird, but Pollyanna Pals is like a newspaper strip from King Feature Syndicates. And they did a couple big giant size reprints. I think it was Fantagraphics at any rate. But that blew me away that kind of visual storytelling was going on in the 20s. And then that really showed me like, there's a lot to be seen in the comic strips, and going back into that stuff. The Little Orphan Annie reprints really blew my mind because I didn't know that kind of dialogue existed that far back in comic book form. I thought that stuff was really like Stan Lee in the 60s, but no, Harold Gray was doing amazing dialogue in the 20s that no one could really approach. The comic book industry didn't do stuff that good. So I think it's more those kind of things. The Tarzan reprints by Hal Foster, with art by Hal Foster, incredible because so many people in the superhero comic book industry read that stuff. So when you read that and you see that's the first of its form of an action hero doing those kind of things, and seeing the dynamic nature of Hal Foster stuff before it gets a little more frozen with Prince Valiant, that just blew me away. I would say it's stuff that's a little more esoteric that kind of blew me away because that's where a lot of the hidden stuff that no one really talks about, that's where a lot of that stuff really affected me. I would say those are probably, there's a series of books, the American Comic Book Chronicles by Tomorrow's, which is amazing. Keith Dallas edited those. Incredible. It's like encyclopedic information about, a variety of years and decades. Just so great. I don't, it's hard to put it all into just, the Harvey Kurtzman biography by Bill Shelley was, I kind of cried at the end, but I don't know, just stuff like that.
Bill. Yeah.
And it's hard to kind of say like which one, but it all affected me differently.
Yeah. It's funny, like today, there's so many books now on the history of like the comics. Everybody's got their, everybody's got their book and all that stuff. And it's always good to see outliers, like too, like obviously like yours, which you could tell it was very, like, once again, if I didn't know you, I would have been like, this guy's an educated guy. Like, I mean, just the way you write, you know, it reminded me a lot of Roy's writing too. It's very like,
Cool.
yeah, very. I know Roy's going to hate me to say this, but it's very teacher professor esque. You know, like Roy doesn't want to hear that, but it's so concise and so fact driven, and I love that when the details are in there, and that's why I enjoy that. That's how my brain works too.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
my OCD. I tell you, before I started writing for Tomorrow's, and Back Issue was the first magazine I started writing for. I would read their articles, you know, and I'd be like, they're missing this. Where is that? And I hate to say it, but I was punching my chest. I'm like, I know I can do better than some of these guys right here and stuff.
Yeah.
So when Michael hired me,
Yeah.
you know, he gave me this huge 9-page article because he even said to me it was so concise and all that, because that's how my brain
that was on
works.
Captain Marvel, is that right?
Yeah, the Superman Captain Marvel.
Yeah, right.
And he was kind of blown away by it. But what I loved about that, reading your book, it reminded me of that, because nothing was missing. And believe me, I look, and like, you know, it's funny. It's funny, and I said, and I have to say that it was like it was almost reading like a school book on the comic. So I really enjoyed that. So I wanted to say that to you.
Great. Well, I mean, that's the dream, you know. If it's used in classes, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, now.
Yeah, no. One thing I wanted to know though is, you know, you dive a lot into comic strips, and I'm a big comic strip fan, you know, especially the older stuff. And you were talking about the dialogue that they had.
Yes.
Then, you know, especially with like Little Orphan Annie.
Yeah.
I just was wondering, you know, if you could elaborate a little more on what you were experiencing reading those, because obviously I've read some, but I haven't gone, you know, as Steve would like to say, you know, I dive into the weeds, you know, on like Little Orphan Annie. So what was the dialogue that was?
It's dialogue with the heart, right? So you feel like it's a real person, considering life and encountering life. And you know, when you look at Daddy Warbucks, I made a YouTube video on this. He's like the Kingpin before there was a Kingpin. I mean, he was politically intimidating, you know, politicians that were pissing him off, and he had people behind him when he'd walk into a room, and you know, he was like taking down you know, mayors and stuff. I mean, he was crazy. And there were times when he would walk down a hallway and then 5 people would ambush him, and then he would like break their heads or come out like with an axe, like he had just killed them. Like, what just happened in there? And and also they would write things about the value of hard work, the value of putting a lot into something, and really focusing and bearing down, making stuff happen. The adventures are great, and the mafia stuff in there is just crazy. Like, you know, you see like, you know, mafia guys put her in a bag, you know, and like, you know, take her and then like abduct her. And then she's just sneaking out like, what the hell was that? Who just kidnapped me? She's sitting by a window, guns blasting through the window of her house and ducking. Like, what is that? You know, it's Daddy Warbucks' enemies again. Like, what is that? You know? So, no, it's a lot more action packed than you'd really think. And it is dialogue with the heart. It's dialogue that touches you, that you feel like these are real people. You know, it's really quite amazing.
So it really was a hard knock life for Annie.
It was a hard knock life. You know, it's a hard knock life when, you know, well, what they do is they go through this thing where she's with Daddy Warbucks, and then life's almost too comfortable, but then there's conflict, but then somehow they get separated again. Like, where is he? Where is she? And then now it's hard knock life, and then they come back. They go back and forth, because you can't just be living in a rich house and not dealing with conflict all the time. So, but no, it's just wonderful stuff. I've read like the first 12 years of it. So I think that's one of those things, that and the Chester Gould. I read the first 10 years of Dick Tracy, and I love that stuff. So those are the two things that I'd go back into and reading more.
Now, did you see a decline though, like in your research with, like, you know, with the comic strip writing? Like, did you were seeing this with Annie, you know, Chester Gould's work, you're seeing, did you see kind of a decline in it?
Yeah. Well, there's longer answers and shorter answers. The shorter answer is that the 30s are more hard hitting and
Mhm.
and intense, less of a filter than 40s, and then 40s are going to be more the 40s, the early 40s. It's almost like it turns into World War II kind of stuff, and
Yeah.
that's where it's fine. It's fun. Tearing the Pirates went from pirates in East Asia and opium dens into World War II, anti-Japanese thing. So I would say that the early World War II, I don't like it as much, and then after World War II, it's almost like things are a little more domesticated and people are more comfortable. So I would say the 30s are my favorite with comic strips. 50s, 60s, it gets a little more space agey. Even Dick Tracy gets more space agey, and it's just not as hard hitting stuff, right? It's a little more, things get more toward camp a little bit, but overall, I like their Secret Agent Corrigan, that was done, late 60s through the 70s with Al Williamson and Archie Goodwin. That's awesome. So there's still exceptions to the rule. That's amazing stuff. But of course, I do love the Secret Agent X when it first came out in the 30s, because that's you have actually the origin of the Punisher in that character, where he's sitting there and his wife and kids get killed by criminals, and he swears to revenge on all criminals, and that's Secret Agent X's origin story, and that's Frank Castle, right? So it's just, there are just certain things like that in the 30s they just had that gritty stuff. Marvel Comics almost seems to bring the gritty stuff of the 30s back in the 70s, that Bronze Age stuff, Punisher and Wolverine and all that stuff, Roy's with Conan the Barbarian.
Oh, yeah.
You almost see like this resurgence of 1930s pulps and comic strip storytelling in Marvel Comics of the 70s, and I think that's why some people love the 70s, Red Sonja and all that stuff. So because it's basically 1930s stuff, just the Marvel Comics version.
Yeah. So it seems like the comic strips really kind of reflect their time period. Like they're almost like good time capsules of how events were played out. A little more rough and gruff in the 30s. You got the Great Depression. Mobs are huge. Mafias are huge. Then we got the patriotic, buy your bonds in the 40s, right? Probably a lot of that coming in. Then the perfect American family of the 50s, and then the space race of the 60s, right? And then kind of bringing
mirroring
back
real life,
mirroring real life. So you're getting the politics and the real events going in.
Yeah, there was like in Dick Tracy in like 1931 or 32, they had a whole Lindbergh baby storyline in it, So it's but in that version they found the baby and saved the baby, but real life that didn't happen. But a lot of that kind of mimics the reality. I mean, that's how you keep things relevant, people coming back for more. When the Great Depression hit, it was interesting to see Daddy Warbucks losing all his money. I mean, that was just really interesting, becoming poor and working in a factory and then losing his vision. Like he actually went blind. It was actually interesting because the illusion of change happened back then, just like it does in comic books. Like when Tony Stark would never walk again, in the 80s, and he walked again, 12 issues after. That was like Daddy Warbucks. He'll never see again. And then, a year, 6 months later, there's an experimental optic nerve surgery that you can have, So, but so it's just a lot of the same kind of, when you have an ongoing character, you want to make it you don't want to change status quo too much, because that's a trademark. That's a brand, right?
Correct. Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah. I'm interesting, Alex. What today, after writing your book and all that stuff, what do you think is a good book of history that you like a different, like a book similar to yours? What is a book that you thought that impressed you? Because I know Danny.
Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I know you were talking about Danny Fingeroff, who I think wrote the greatest Stan Lee biography of all time. I think a movie should be made. But I mean, he also has some great books. But I'm just thinking, like something like that, another book kind of similar to yours. What do you think that?
Well, it's interesting. I just kind of look at my shelf because it all impressed me. It's like choosing between my kids. Like, how do you? But yeah. I mean, it's hard. I've read so many. I don't have a good one answer, because it was all just stuff that again, I like the American Comic Book Chronicles, but that's not just one book. That's like a series, but I love that. I thought it was good for me when I first got into reading comics. That was really influential on me. And then there's a book called Evolution of the Superheroes. I have it here somewhere, but that's another one that I enjoyed, because it goes back to like Agamemnon and whatever, and that's kind of fun, going back that far.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now winding down, Steve, any last questions for Mr. Grant?
Yes, I wanted to. Obviously, your breadth and the sheer amount of material that you've read is probably more than 99.9% of everyone else on Earth when it comes to comics. I wanted to broach a question which, is at the forefront right now of our entire industry. And me, John, and Niall have been talking with various creators about this same subject. Where do you see comics going now? What do you think they need to do? Because I don't know whether you're aware, but superhero comics, let's focus.
Yeah, right.
American superhero comics are in dire trouble. There's success over there with the manga stuff. They're having success in big sales. But when it comes to the characters that you grew up with and the universes, they are struggling. After all that knowledge and skill that you have, all that historical context, do you have any nuggets that you can throw out there that will help, publishers, creators, or whatever it is, save this industry?
Well, the one thing that has kept it going for 25 years was expansion into other media, expanding into the movies, the TV shows, board games, video games, right? Trying to get, even iPad apps, that kids can play that have these characters. So I got into the comics through Amazing Spider-Man cartoon, right? So expansion into media, which it's been doing to try to get everyone of all ages aware that these characters exist. So they've done a good job of doing that. But then the actual act of reading a comic book is not necessarily, sought after by, let's say, my son, who we do it every night together, but it's only before bedtime that we're doing it. He has his iPad with his friends. They're playing Roblox. They're doing gaming. And that's a different thing. And this is like, how did comic books survive when, TV came out? And how did the cinemas survive with TV? And how does all that stuff, American cinema, comic books, survive when you could just watch TikTok for 3 hours and call it a night? How do you do that? And so, one answer is follow the medium. So there's going to have to be, I know that sounds crazy, and I know that's a different age group, but if you want younger people, you got to have some sort of Marvel superhero thing going on TikTok that just kind of pops in and pops out and gets people wondering, like a little 20-second quick adventure quickie thing. And, doing things like that to then get people to want to know the fuller story somewhere else. So expansion into things that we would maybe find unsavory in some ways. So that would help. The problem is competing technologies, right? There's so much competing technology. There's so much content now. Like, how do you really make a name for yourself with all that content out there? It's not like in the old days where everything was quiet and then all that was going on was, Stanley fan letters like that. That doesn't happen. And so you're just going to have to, go into other media, and then keep true to the character. Don't veer too much off the initial mission that defined the character in the first place. Keep that totem element intact. Batman's always going to be vengeful. The Punisher, he kills bad guys. Don't stop killing bad guys as Punisher. Spider-Man will always have a neurotic, approach to fighting crime. A lot of guilt. Like Stan said in an interview, like the Woody Allen of superheroes before the weird sex stuff with him.
I was going to throw that in there.
Yeah. Because May Parker turned out okay, the daughter. But keeping true to the characters, expansion into other media, and then writing in a way that, everyone can kind of get behind, keeping it more where everyone can agree. Like how does Dave Filoni make Star Wars that he touches fine, but then when other people do it, everyone splits down the middle on it? What did Dave Filoni do with that? And it's that approach.
Yeah.
Jon Favreau, the way he approached Mandalorian, everyone got behind that. Where's that guy in the Marvel world? That's got in the DC world, in the comic world. That touch has to be there where everyone can get behind. And you go back to the basic elements of what makes for a hero story. Don't try to subvert the hero. I think that's also another thing that's going to backfire. So you can subvert it a little bit, like the way they did in Marvel in the 60s, but all you're doing is just creating flaws, but you're still a good person. I don't know. There are ways. You just have to stay true to the character, but then keep it in a modern setting. And I don't know. Those are the best ways you can do it. What's probably going to happen in the industry, though, as buyers reduce over time, which they will, even despite those things, then it comes down to like that European model where you come out with certain albums that don't necessarily have to be part of a continuing thing, or maybe they are, but you come out with albums, a few self-complete graphic novel formats for that you would more distribute in a book fashion, not necessarily in a serial comic periodical that it is now. There are just going to have to be ways where, you have to try to adapt, and they're not going to stop comic books, or at least that, because they need the think tank for new material for these IPs for those big companies that bought them. But you have to still compete. And I know that's a long answer, but it's probably the best answer I can give.
Yeah. It's too bad kids today are not gonna, the magic of like the paper, there was something about the turning the next page and the smell. I mean, you say that to a kid nowadays, it's just like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
But there was something magical about the newspaper print and the old Tales to Astonishes.
Yeah,
and
right.
I remember being at a church and they had the stacks of comics there. And like, I remember seeing like Marvel superheroes. I'm talking about the ones from the 60s, all those reprints or Marvel. And I just remember there was something about the freeness of it. And I know comics are big business now. And obviously Steve knows this, you collect it, but there's something so, so unpure about a comic in those cases, and they're just all locked in those cases,
right.
Like the CGC cases, airtight, never to breathe. And it's just like something about when kids had them rolled in their back pocket, or like, like baseball cards in the spokes. There was something, and chewing bubble gum and apple and Cracker Jacks, getting I know there's something about the freeness of it. And at least I was at an era too. Like I remember cutting out the pictures or getting the Presto Magics and then putting sometimes not using the scenery, and I would use the comic and use the scenery in there to make that character in there. I just miss that. That's what I miss, is the freeness of it. When I see comic, obviously going with Roy all over the world and people bring him their comic books. I love when their comics are loved, and they're all, sometimes they'll say to me like, oh, sorry, it's in bad condition. I was like, no, these are the best. I go, and I'll say this to parents that they're with their kids. And I'll say, are these your comics when you were a kid? They'll be like, yeah. And, I just love that. Those Hulk 181s we get that are just like stacked with all the other ones. And it was the father's collection. Oh, I almost traded. No, everyone's a story. You don't get that today with like the computer,
You're right. You don't get that story. That's true. That's part of the magic. Yeah, that's a good point.
But I think I've never heard that direction before, Alex, about the TikTok.
Yeah.
And I think Niall is way more on the cutting edge than me and John in regards to the underpinnings of what's going on here. Because realistically speaking, me and John are like dinosaurs, the old dinosaurs, not those little tiny small mammals. We're like huge lumbering dinosaurs, and our time has basically come and gone. But that TikTok has an amazing amount of power, and the audience is multiple amounts of millions. And it's going to take someone like Niall, or younger than Niall, or whatever it is, someone that's technically adept, to translate and try and create that feeling that me and John have had, or
Yeah.
But for now, and that's the key, because at the heart of it, you know, when I die, I don't want the whole industry to go with me. Okay, I want things to be going on afterwards, and if we have to go into new mediums, you know, let's do it. But I think it's going to take a younger, more dynamic generation that think, you know. But believe you me, at Torpedo, I'm one of the oldest. So whenever I begin talking, they're like, "Oh my God, the dinosaur's talking again," you know. And they'll come up with ideas, and they're like, "Well, why don't you just do this?" They bring out their phone and they hit and things. I'm like, "How are you doing that?"
Yeah.
That is what's needed. So I think your idea is actually quite inspiring.
Yeah, there's a way to reach them, you know, and that's, you have to overcome. Look, the way. So, okay, here's what TikTok kind of did is we have streaming services. We don't necessarily flip through cable now. We can watch what we want to watch. But TikTok, you're just flipping through that the way you're flipping through cable channel. You're getting the same, you're getting that there now. It's just on your phone. So, but it's coming from real people. It's like America's Funniest Home Videos or whatever.
Yes.
Well, there's a way that you can then relay 20, 40-second thing, edit it just right, give it that punch, and now everyone's liking it, loving it, whatever. And what, you know, when comics came out, you know, John and I, we had immigrant parents that wanted us to be American. But a lot of American friends would be like, well, my parents hated it when I read that stuff, you know? Well, why? Because it was the way we're looking at TikTok is that way. It's a cheap, easier visual entertainment rather than reading a long form Sherlock Holmes novel, right? So if you know, if you're going to connect with that audience, that's part of the reason why I did a YouTube channel, is so I can, like, my age range on my YouTube channel is different than in the Facebook group, in our Comic Historians Facebook group. That's, you know, 45 to like 65 or
yeah, you got the dinosaurs. You got the dinosaurs. Yeah, that's no doubt about it.
But on the YouTube channel, that age range is 25 to 34. You know, and that was what I was trying to do, is really make it so that they'll get into this and love it as much.
What do you think about AI? I'm thinking almost like there's got to be something with AI. Like the comic is going to like actually, the panels are going to move and talk and have action, you know, and before, you know, I'm just saying with the way technology is, it's going to.
Are you talking about like an interactive story that you're reading and it's responding to you?
I'm sure. I'm just, but
well, that's probably going to happen.
They have that now. You can have, they have motion comics. They have, you know, digital comics that you can make choices based on the story.
Right.
You know,
but I think what John is talking about is like a moving picture that's actually responding to the reader in some spontaneous fashion, and they're not even pressing stuff. It's like reacting to their facial expressions or something, and that could happen.
All in all, though, these characters, despite the technology and everything, these characters, especially the big guys, they'll always be around. They'll always be healthy. You know, like, and that's the magic of this. There's always going to be a kid going to be born that's going to have that little Spider-Man doll next to him. It's so general.
Spider-Man will always exist.
Yeah, Spider-Man, Hulk, the big heroes. Some guys will come and go, but they'll always still be around. And that's the beauty of this industry, this everything. You know, I mean, like, despite the technology, those characters are strong enough to live forever. And they're always going to live, you know, like every artist, every writer wants their work to outlive them, you know, and this is something you know, us fans, like, you know, going all around the world with Roy. I mean, he really is like for me, like he's a hero of mine, but like just the fact of what he brought to the world, the pop culture, like and he's such as we all know, Roy, he's such a modest, like, quiet guy, like,
very, very unassuming, and even if you say, look, you elevated Marvel Silver Age and you brought in all these new people, people like, well, I knew those guys, and then and then, you know, it was really Stan and Jack and Steve, and I just kind of, you know, I was a fill-in. I'm like, no, I mean, there's more to it than this.
But like, it's just amazing how those something he did and those other guys, Stan, Jack, Jules, Julian, even Mort, all those guys, they did something that we all just cannot.
That's true.
Like, it's just not going to go away.
Yeah,
you
that's
know,
right.
it's so powerful. So like talking about inventions or what's going to happen, TikTok, whatever, there's going to be something else 20, 30, 40 years, but it's still going to be Superman.
That's
it's,
right.
And
Green Lantern isn't going anywhere. Flash
no,
is
and
always
no
gonna
matter
be there.
how and no matter how bad we try to diversify them or try to squeeze them now, there's going to be some writer that's going to come back and he's going to take them back to his roots and he's going to come back again. And you're going to see, you know, we just happen to be in the throes of a very erratic time where everybody wants to throw. But like I'm just saying, everybody's throwing their 2 cents on these characters. And look, the industry is going in absolute influx. Like, I mean, it's going down. So there's going to be somebody or something that's going to take something back. Yeah. Whether it's 10 years from now, 5 years from now, whatever, and it's going to propel them.
It'll propel it again. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's why the my book is creator really driven on the chapters, is because there was a person behind all that stuff and there is a team behind all that stuff. And there will be that, what you're saying. And I know they're all doing they're all trying, but that being said, Jason Aaron's run on Thor was beautiful, so everyone should read that. But I will say that I love his Thor. So.
Okay. In ending, no. And thank you. And anyways, Alex, thank you so much. You're one of the. You know, your book is another thing that's going to fall into somebody's hand. There's going to be some kid that's going to read that, like you read Steranko's, that it's going to inspire. And it's always good to see that there's an author that's writing something that has the love of that's going to that's putting it out there, that hopefully like I could see it, and that somebody like a little Roy Thomas and Jerry Bales and Billy Joe White doing an alter ego magazine. You know, Jerry Bales coming up. Who's going to care about these comic books? But they got something that, you know, I mean, it's just another part of the fandom that we all love, and that it's a good part of the education. And we know how it can be a very cynical industry too at times, but you wrote it. I got to admit, I love when you wrote it down the middle and I could see the passion, and you give credit to all these guys because what they meant to you. And that's the thing what some people don't understand. These creators sometimes, especially from our generation, I know Steve can attest to this because me and Steve are cuckoo. We love the heroes as much as we love the creators, right, Steve? Sometimes we can't differentiate the two. You know, Starlin and Thanos, Roy and Conan, or Wolverine, and all this other stuff. I mean, like and that's something I think today's generation will never know. Like Chris Claremont is Professor X, you know, like, you know,
that's a great way of putting that. Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
just
that's right. It's the creators that, for me, are my heroes, and just like you said, they're the people that it's like if you look at the hero long enough, you can look behind it, and there's a real person there. Who's that guy or woman? So it's, again, that's the whole thing, is the behind the scenes, under all that, they're real people, and they're flesh and blood, and they die of medical reasons like the rest of us do. And who are they? And who are they? And there are still some around, and, you know, get to know them the best you can, you know, because these people don't exist after a while.
And you're one of the guys that is keeping their flames alive. And that's what we try to do here too, you know. It's stuff. We love these characters and we love these creators, all of them, because some better than others, but they gave us magic, and that's why we're all here. And they gave us the ability to dream, right? The American dream.
That's right.
The American dream.
That's right.
American dream. So, okay, Steve, so get us out of here with Mighty Mystic Mjolnir. Thank you, Alex.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Yes.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us on Pop XP. If you haven't already, make sure to click that subscribe button and also click the bell for notifications when we go live and we upload some awesome new content. Also, don't forget to head on over to Twitter and follow us at the Pop XP, and over on Instagram at the Pop XP. Thanks again everyone, and we'll see you soon.